This is the temporary caucus chair and secretary training. If you're here for anything else, you're in the wrong spot, but it's going to be fun, so I would recommend staying. So I'll do an overview first of kind of what we're going to talk about. So we've kind of done the welcome here. We're going to go over preparing for the caucuses themselves, calling the caucus registration procedures, calling the caucus to order, preference group formation, reporting, electing delegates, electing county committee people, electing precinct committee people, resolution discussion and adoption, adjournment paperwork. If we have the time, if time's looking okay, we might do a mock caucus, but that's just kind of depending on what's going on, and then any final questions you might have. Another thing I want to mention is I have question slides built in for pretty much after every numerical point. So if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind holding it, this is kind of a big training, and so it can drag it. It can make the training drag on. So if you wouldn't mind holding questions until those question slides, and then I'll let you know there is some like discussion where there's no questions. We'll just talk and this and that. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Preparing for the caucuses is going to be the first thing we're talking about. You've already done the first step, and that's coming to your caucus training. So congrats on that one. But as a precinct chair or a temporary secretary, one of the things you need to make sure you do for caucus night is check your caucus packet. In the middle of December, I will actually be having to go to Des Moines for the week and print out the District 1 caucus packets. But there are 1,682 packets, and one of me for the district. And so that's going to be something I double and triple check to try to make sure, okay, this packet is right, this is the right county, this is the right precinct, the right delegates. But as soon as you get your packet, make sure you check over it and make sure all the information is correct. Depending on your county, your chair will be getting that to you around the middle of January. The first week of January, I'm going to be driving out and delivering them to the different counties in the district. So you just want to make sure on that the number of delegates your caucus elects is listed. If you have any questions on that, I actually brought some sheets for the 3 counties that are here today for how many delegates each precinct elects. They're kind of floating around, so those are available. You want to make sure the number of committee members your caucus elects is also listed on there, as well as their contact information in case anything goes wrong. And then just following up, make sure that all the forms and envelopes are there in your packet, and you know how to use every form. So your caucus packet will actually contain reporting credentials, a letter from IDP Chair Dr. McGuire, posters, letters from presidential candidates and nominating petitions, an IDP contribution envelope, caucus registration forms, absentee ballot request forms, any voter registration forms, surveys, a math worksheet, summary of caucus results form, and return envelopes. There will also be some posters included in that you put up on the wall. There's a caucus math poster, there's an IDP tax checkoff poster, this and that, and the use of those are pretty self-explanatory. So actually what you need to do before the caucus night is make sure you physically go visit your caucus location to go check for cellular reception or Wi-Fi access for reporting, that there's adequate seating there, that there's tables that you could use for registration, that there's a location of restroom, you know where the location of restrooms is, and a contact information in case anything goes wrong, and as well as check for any accessibility problems that might be there. So things you should bring to the caucus is your caucus packet, a smartphone if possible, or a cell phone, a calculator, several pens and pencils, paper, a clock and a watch, markers and poster board or butcher paper, and masking tape or scotch tape or a stapler. Also something I kind of forgot to go over before, this, I hope everybody got a chance to get the caucus precinct chair training materials. This presentation is followed more or less along, not word for word, but it follows along chronologically with this presentation. There's going to be a couple times that I say, hey, there's an example of this form in this sheet, and just yell out the page number. We got these yesterday, and so I don't have the page numbers memorized, but I more or less know what pages they're on. We'll get to that here in a second. So Especially in your big precincts. I know on here we have arrive 45 minutes to an hour early. In some of your bigger precincts, for instance in Dubuque County, you might want to arrive an hour 15, an hour 30 early to set up tables and chairs, lay out all the materials, hang up posters. An easy thing to help out with this is finding volunteers to help. Some precinct leaders have told me that they call the presidential staff in their areas and they say, hey, beforehand, we need you to send us some staff members that can help us put up chairs or can help us lay out materials. If that's a relationship you have, by all means. In some places, you'll have volunteers that want to help you out. And in some places, the first person that walks in the room, you can just say, hey, I need help putting out this poster, I do that. So it's always helpful to find volunteers to help with some of those just logistical things at the beginning of the night. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So now we're moving on to caucus registration procedures. So to be eligible to caucus in Iowa, you must be a resident of that precinct. You must be 18 years old by November 8, 2016. That is the date of the next general election. You must be a registered Democrat, but you can also, there's registration available at all sites, and so if they're a Republican or an independent and they want to register as a Democrat, they can do that. And they need to be signed in or in line at 7 p.m. So as most of you know, the caucus is a public event. There are people that might not even be from Iowa. They could even be from other countries, like foreign press that are coming to report about the Iowa caucus. And so in some of your locations, you'll have members of the media there as an observer. You know, TV crews, bloggers, newspaper, radio. That's totally fine. Sometimes you also might have just young people that just want to see the process. I think that I know in the tri-counties up north, they've told me that like high school Minnesotans will sometimes come in just to watch to see what's going on. You know, that might be happen in your precincts as well as non-resident campaign staff, campaign surrogates, and volunteers. You know, while we definitely welcome observers, it's kind of important to note that observers are there to watch. They're not there to get in the way of anything. They're not there to lead discussion. And it's really helpful to actually designate an area for observers. This is probably I'll get some feedback on this, of how in the past if anyone's done caucus before, have you designated an area for observers? How was that handled?
Yes, separate.
We put them in another a side of the room away from where we were caucusing, and explicitly told them not to interfere. They would be asked to leave. But I've already had 2 telephone calls, one from Great Neck, New York, and the other one from Rockford, Illinois, school teachers that want to bring some classroom people into the caucus. And because they were going to be in Rockford for some type of an educational proceeding. And Tom, you got one from Ripon College that they want a group of teachers and college students want to come down with her. So there's a lot of interest in it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that we're very excited to have people there and watching the process, just as long as they're not interfering with the process. You know, Iowa media is pretty much knows procedure, knows how caucuses work, but this might be a thing with out-of-town and out-of-state media that they might want to bring in a big broadcast, a bunch of lights and cameras, and you know, that's great that they want to report on the caucus, but you as the chair, that is for you to run your caucus, and that is for your precinct's Democrats to make their voices heard. You know, it is inappropriate for the media to interview caucus participants during the caucus, and that's something we're actually going to talk about next slide, is that you actually have the right to ask people to leave. So, you know, make sure that people know who are observers at the caucus, and this is media as well as non-resident campaign staff. Make sure that they know, hey, you know, you're welcome to be here, and we're glad you're here, but you can't hinder or obstruct this caucus from proceeding. And so, you know, I recommend on this ask people to leave a 3-step policy that on the first time just give them a warning and say, hey, you know, you're getting in the way. I'm gonna have to ask you to stop. On the second one, say you're continuing to get in the way. I'm gonna have to ask you to stop, or else I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. And on the third one, ask them to leave. you run that caucus, that is your caucus, and you can do that. That's something that is not you. It's within your power to do. So going forward to registration, it is, especially at your big precincts, very, very helpful to have somebody there, 2 or 3 or 4 people there helping you with registration. That is the time when bottlenecks, as you all know from 2008, seem to happen, and that's where your long lines start getting there around 6:50. So I recommend also recruiting 3 to 4 people ahead of time and saying, I don't need you to speak in front of anybody, I don't need you to argue, I don't need you to do anything, I just need you to sign in people. But make sure the first 15, 20 minutes that you're just kind of watching to make sure registration's being done correctly, that no forms are getting messed up or anything like that. That's a pretty easy thing to ask somebody to do. If you know a neighbor that's going to caucus, just say, hey, would you mind working at the table and just greet people when they come in? Because it's very important that all caucus attendees must sign in at the registration table. Kind of what I say is, if they didn't sign in, they don't exist. And I know some precincts, you get a sticker to caucus, and you can only get that sticker if you do sign in. That's very important to get everybody signed in. So here's kind of what registration looks like. As you probably all know, there's 2 different forms for registration. There's the 2016 caucus registration form for registered Democrats. An example of this, I think, is on page 27. Am I right there? Yeah. Page 26 actually has the first form I'm going to be talking about. That's going to have, in around the middle of December, we're going to go to every county auditor and say, hey, we need your registration rolls for all the Democrats and all the precincts. And so as of the middle of December, it is going to be up to date. An attendee must sign the name next to their printed name and also fill in the bubble that says, yes, I attended. Kind of an important thing to note right here is that there is also where they can bubble for their first presidential preference. That bubble is not binding. They can bubble that, and it doesn't bind them to that vote. We just use it for data keeping purposes, so we can track how the night ended up panning out. And so that's just kind of something to note there. If their name is not on that 2016 already pre-registered Democrat, they will actually sign the new registration form. So that's for new voters, and also people who are 17 and a half years old must sign that and fill out a voter registration form. So you'll have youth there. Different counties actually have youth caucuses. Some do, some don't. But youth who will not be eligible to vote by the next election, they can actually sign on the youth caucus attendee form if your county party does it at their county convention. They can't participate in the caucuses, but they can still be an observer and they can still watch the process. And it's neat, later down the road when they do turn 18, you have it in your county records that, yeah, they did come to this, and so let's get them involved in the county party. So if a caucus attendee's name does not appear on the 2016 caucus registration form as registered Democrats, but they believe they're already registered, go ahead and have them re-register as a Democrat and sign on the 2016 caucus registration form for new voters. The county auditor can get the rest of it sorted out, where if they might not have been registered and they thought they were registered, and this and that. So here's a kind of a screen example of that, and like I said, that page is page 26 is where that is, and so you see where there's an attendance bubble as well as their first presidential preference. And we'll get to the other bubbles later in the presentation of what they mean. And here's the one for the new voters. Okay, so also at your registration table or wherever you put it at, there are absentee ballot request forms. If people are interested in voting by mail, that's how they vote every time. It'll be collected right after the caucus is called to order. An important thing to note, and I'll go over these absentee ballot request forms a little bit more later in the presentation, that this is for the general election of 2016. I know in District 1 we have a primary here, so this is not for the primary in June. This is for the general election in November. As well as there's an IDP caucus survey that everybody can fill out and should be returned right before or right a little bit after the caucus is called to order. Are there any questions so far?
When a person is, let's say a Republican wants to come in, is all the voters in the precinct listed down here?
No.
Just the Democrats?
Yeah, just the Democrats. And so they will have to re-register as a Democrat.
Okay.
And then sign that new voter form. Is there anything else?
Is the new voter example in here?
Yeah, it's page 27. And there's not an example of a voter registration form, but it's just a typical, we didn't have an example in there, but just the Iowa voter registration form is what that looks like.
So is there a separate form they have to fill out too?
Yes, they'll have to re-register for the state of Iowa as a Democrat, as well as we need to put that on our rolls.
Just a kind of a question about registering or signing for absentee ballot request form that early, 8 months ahead of election. I think will be confusing, especially in Dubuque County. There's going to be several primary races. We have District 1, and shortly there will be an announcement about another one. I have a little information on, but at the county level. And we have one for sheriff, Dubuque County Sheriff. I don't know that that's a good idea.
Yeah, and so we did that statewide. For counties that have stuff going on in January, or in June, what I recommend doing is having your own separate absentee ballot forms for that election. That was just something that was decided statewide, and I know different municipalities have different things going on. Is there any other questions? Yes, yeah, Lucas, probably some clarification on that.
Hi, to that point that it's incredibly early for absentee ballot requests for the general election, what I want to say about that is we can track every single person who requests an absentee ballot on the day of the Iowa caucuses, and we will be implementing a program where we keep in touch with that voter throughout the course of the election cycle. We will give them multiple touches to remind them that you requested an absentee ballot at the Iowa caucuses on February 1st, 2016, and you'll be receiving that 40 days before Election Day. It's a great thing that we're able to track all of that information. So we're not going to let those people go by the wayside in any way, shape, or form. All of that will be tracked, and we'll make sure that we keep in constant contact with all of those folks. But it's never too early to start thinking about the general.
One of the big problems with doing it that early is the fact that when people get their ballot, they say, I didn't ask for this. So if you're going to be touching them in the meantime, I think that's a good thing.
That's exactly right. Multiple touches, not just one.
Keep reminding them.
What was that?
Keep reminding.
That's exactly right. Yep.
I think what we'll see is for the primary, we go around and ask people, they want to fill out an absentee ballot request form. They'll say, why already did that?
Well, all that information is going to be able to be tracked, and if you use Vote Builder, it's going to be available on that, so you'll be able to see that information if you're knocking with a campaign that does have Vote Builder, which is a nice feature. So, you'll be able to see that on your if you're canvassing with Minivan, which is a great tool, a great app. You'll be able to see that information.
Yeah, I think if we're assuming that they're going to remember they signed for the general, not the primary,
Most of
I
them
think
probably
that's a
will.
mistake.
Oh no, we're not, which is why we're going to give them multiple touches. We're not going to let these people just go by the wayside, in any way, shape, or form.
If they forget that they signed and get their ballot and lose it, that creates another big complication. Because a lot of people forget about that they get it and lose their ballots, and then they gotta.
Yeah, and that's something that we encounter every single election cycle
They
here
mess
in the
up
state
a
of
lot of
Iowa.
absentee ballots every election. too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know you guys have knocked all the doors. I've knocked all the doors, and we've all encountered people who, what do you mean? I got an absentee ballot. Well, you've been sitting on it for 20 days, and I got thrown out with the paper because you forgot about it. Those people, unfortunately, are just always going to be a part of that universe. Don't worry, we'll keep harassing them.
We have early voting at the courthouses, and that is really an easy way for somebody to vote. And it's also been very good for Democrats.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an all-of-the-above strategy.
So
that
I
we're
think,
running right now.
that really needs to be encouraged, that they can vote at the courthouse.
Yep.
And that the phone calls stop.
That's exactly right.
Boy, when I call a voter and they say, and I tell them that if they go to the courthouse and vote, they go to the courthouse and vote to stop the phone calls.
Exactly right. Excellent. One last question, and then we'll go ahead and get back to the presentation.
When are those ballots, absentee ballots, sent out to them?
The actual absentee ballots,
Yes.
they are mailed out no earlier than 40 days before the general election. That is correct, right, Madam Auditor?
Yes, end of September.
Okay.
Okay,
Excellent.
we'll keep going, keep moving here. So at this point, during the caucus, actually is when you would call things to order. This occurs at 7 p.m. or soon after registration is complete. I know in some of your bigger precincts, it obviously can't start at 7 p.m. because you had a lot of people get in at 6:50. So this is pretty much whenever the people who are in line at 7 p.m. have gotten through the door and have gotten registration, you would call the caucus to order. You as the temporary chair or temporary secretary would introduce yourself, kind of go over the caucus agenda. And this is where you not only, you explain the primary purposes of the caucus, what we're doing here, but for me also as well as here, this is where you can introduce caucus goers to the county party. As you guys probably know, there's going to be a lot of people who show up on caucus night that have not shown up to anything else and that you have never even seen. And so at this point, you're the face of your local county party. And so you can say, it is great to see everybody here. I'm real happy to see everybody here. Tonight we're going to form preference groups. We're going to elect delegates to the county convention and elect Democratic Party leadership. But also that's not all we do here. And explain, we have a soup supper coming up here. Our next county meeting is going to be at the UAW hall at this time. We'd love to see everybody there. We have a point in here in the presentation where you do that afterwards, after the caucus is done, but I think this is a really appropriate time to go ahead and kind of introduce yourself and say, in this precinct we do this, and we're excited about electing Democrats on November 8th as well as any other election on November 8th of the next year, 2017. So that is where you kind of get to introduce yourself and introduce what the county party is. Then you move forward to an IDP presentation. This is where you'll read a letter from Dr. McGuire, just about kind of saying welcome to the 2016 Iowa caucus. You'll also read the IDP finance envelope and pass it around to caucus attendees for contributions to the party. On this one, checks should be made payable to the IDP. Seal and return it. Get the secretary to sign across there. I know different counties have other different procedures. They have their own pass the hats. I don't know. Well, does Dubuque County? Do y'all usually have your own county pass the hat?
We usually have a receptacle for donations.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I'm just for this presentation because every county does it differently. I'm broad, but I would check with your county chair about how you want to handle a county-wide pass the hat as well. But it's important on this one to follow the procedures because there's some FEC disclosure laws and this and that. So the secretary will sign across there and you'll turn it in and it will go in envelope A. And I'll be going over exactly what those envelopes are later in the presentation.
That don't happen.
So, this is where if somebody does want to fill out an absentee ballot request form, let them know that it's there. I know on absentee ballot request forms there's a receipt section. Most of this will be pre-filled since we're giving these to you, but you'll still have to fill out the ballot requested by and time and date request received by agent. Collect all those forms and make sure they're filled out entirely and legibly, and place them all in envelope C for the county auditor. So you'll also read off about the IDP income tax checkoff that they can help out the IDP by checking that box in their tax on their taxes, and that it doesn't reduce their refund or increase any amount that they owe. So on letters and nominating petitions, I know that I have this in the presentation chronologically after 7 p.m., especially in your bigger precincts, and I would argue everywhere. I would do this as soon as people start getting in. Go ahead and give the first person, hey, here's a nominating petition. You can go ahead and collect signatures for that. Some precincts have a separate table right by the registration so that it didn't clog up the process. I would just recommend doing this before 7 o'clock so that you're not, this isn't taking a whole lot of time. Go ahead and start getting this filled out early. They can sign for as many offices or as many candidates for a single office as they choose. Like I said, I know district-wide we have 3 people running for Congressional District 1. They could sign all 3 if they wanted to, just as an example. For state legislature candidates and above, put that in envelope A for the state party. For all the rest, that will go in envelope B for the county party. At this point, you'll be electing permanent officers. Before official business can really start happening, a permanent chair and secretary will need to be elected. Most of the time, this is a formality. In fact, I'd say 90-something% of the time, the person, you as the temporary chair, will get elected as the permanent chair. You should seek the position. Anyone can nominate you, or you could nominate yourself and say, I'm calling nominations for Davis to be permanent chair of this caucus. Written ballots can be used, but I would recommend a voice vote on that. Just ask for the ayes and nays, and then repeat the above steps for a permanent secretary as well. Are there any questions on that? Good deal. So now we're going to get into viability. In order to be eligible to elect delegates at the county convention, a candidate must have the minimum level of eligible caucus attendees in their preference groups. If anyone ever asks you from out of state what viability is, there's your textbook definition right there. Viability is determined at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter. This cannot happen. You can read aloud nominating petitions. You could probably even get official business started a little before 7, depending on how many people were there. But this has to happen after 7 p.m. Kind of a thing to note here, if more than 85% of attendees don't wish to form preference groups, the delegates might go ahead and the delegates will be elected by the caucus as a whole. What that means, I know that sounds a little wordy, what that means in practice is that if 86% of people in your precinct stand behind one candidate, you do not have to form preference groups. That candidate has carried the entire caucus. That really doesn't happen a lot in fact, I have not heard of it happening in big precincts in a competitive presidential year. It's kind of a rural precinct thing where 4 or 5 people might show up and they all decide and, they're all unanimous and say, yeah, we like this person. So the caucus chair will actually count the number of eligible attendees and announce that number. Based on the number of eligible attendees and the number of delegates to elect, viability is calculated. As I kind of mentioned, there's floating around the room for the different districts and the different counties how many delegates yours elects. Those are preset. You will know that before the night of the caucus. And so the only thing that determines viability from that point on is the number of eligible attendees. And we'll run through how you calculate that. So this is beforehand. I checked to see if any of the counties here had any one delegate precincts. There are not any in Dubuque, Jackson, or Delaware, but I'll still go through it. So if your precinct only elects one delegate, no preference groups form. The delegate is elected by the whole caucus. They're elected by majority rule, and paper ballots can be used. If your precinct elects 2 delegates, and there are some counties here that do have some 2-delegate precincts. So to be viable in a precinct that has 2 delegates, a group must contain at least 25% of eligible caucus attendees, meaning that viability is equal to eligible attendees times 0.25. If your precinct elects 3 delegates, to be viable, a group has to have 1/6 of the total attendees, meaning that viability is equal to eligible attendees divided by 6. So this is probably the majority of precincts that we're going to be talking about today, is determining viability in a precinct that has 4 or more. So to be viable, in this case, a preference group must have at least 15% of the total attendees in their group, meaning that viability is equal to eligible attendees times 0.15. We'll talk about it in later slides. I'll actually do the math on some examples, but it's important to note these numbers always round up for viability. So I guess that's the next point in the slide. When calculating fractions, the numbers will always round up. There can actually be no more viable preference groups than delegates to award. There'll be an example on a slide I'll work through later that I'll explain out exactly what that means. Once viability has been determined, the chair announces that number to the caucus, and I will repeat this throughout the presentation. That number does not change, ever, throughout the caucus. The viability threshold remains the same no matter what. So the rest of the caucus, that is the number for what the viability threshold is. So here's some examples where we go through and calculate viability. So let's say you have 17 eligible caucus attendees with 2 delegates to elect from that precinct. In that case, your viability is taking that 17 eligible attendees, multiplying it times 0.25, which gives you 4.25. Since for viability, it always rounds up, that goes to 5, meaning that in that precinct, to be eligible to get a delegate at the county convention, a candidate must have at least 5 people. In a precinct where there are 43 eligible attendees with 3 delegates to elect, viability is equal to 43 divided by 6. Since there were 3 delegates to elect, our viability is that 1/6 threshold, giving us 7.1667. That number rounds up. Viability is equal to 8 in that precinct. A precinct that has 61 eligible attendees, 5 delegates to elect, viability is equal to 61 times 0.15, which gives you 9.15, meaning that viability is equal to 10 eligible caucus attendees. Are there any questions? Good deal. So now to formation of preference groups. So people have up to 30 minutes to divide into preference groups. If that needs to be, it can be extended by a majority vote, as well as if it's been 20 minutes and people have kind of made their way and have formed in their preference groups. You can say, hey, is everybody okay with, we're gonna call this formation of preference groups, everybody okay to move along? The caucus chair should direct preference groups to different areas of the room. This is where volunteers can come in handy in your bigger precincts as well. I know in 2008, there's probably a lot of examples where rooms were really, really full and it was hard to do this process. And so this is something that you should be very conscious of, that there's a separation of line between this corner is where this candidate starts and that corner is where that candidate starts, and here are where the marked boundaries are. So it is actually at this point possible for an uncommitted preference group to form. And after groups form, a preference group chair shall be elected within each group. That person is going to be more or less your liaison as you as a permanent chair. They will be the person that comes to talk to you about what's going on in their candidates' preference groups, so that you don't have 20 people, trying to bug you and trying to come in your ear saying this and that. You have one person that you can talk to with each preference group. So there are a couple what-if scenarios, and we actually, I referenced this, and so I'll go through what this would look like. So what if there are more viable preference groups than the number of delegates to be elected? The answer in that situation is that there cannot be, and the smallest group would actually at that point be told they would need to realign, or they would need to absorb other groups until the number of groups equals the number of delegates to be elected. Okay, so following that, what if there's a tie, actually, for the smallest preference group? The answer to that is a game of chance will be used to determine what group must realign. A coin toss is recommended between 2 equal-sized groups, where drawing names out of a hat is recommended for 3 or more groups. I wish you luck in this scenario. So here's another one that kind of alludes back to something I talked about earlier. What if a non-viable preference group decides to leave rather than to realign? The answer is nothing, but the formal answer is viability is based on the number of eligible attendees at 7 p.m. That number remains fixed throughout the night. So viability is not recalculated at that point. Viability remains the same. So at this point, all preference groups are going to be given an opportunity to realign. This is where they can join with other non-viable groups and make two maybe non-viable groups viable. They can switch around. It's important to note here that actually all the groups during this first realignment can realign. It's kind of a free-for-all. This is 30 minutes. It can be extended by a majority vote. It can also, the same rules apply if it's been 15 minutes, no one's moving around and everybody's kind of standing there with their hands in their pocket. You can say, hey, is everybody okay if we go ahead and move along the process? If for any reason any non-viable preference groups still remain, there's a second realignment that happens. But during this realignment, only non-viable preference groups may realign. Does anybody have any questions on that? Because that's kind of a little new. Okay. So at this point, it is only the non-viables can move and form with that. They can join together to become viable. An example given to me yesterday was 2 non-viable groups become an uncommitted group, this or that. But only non-viable groups can realign on that second realignment. This is 30 minutes. It can be finished in 15 if you see everybody is moving along. It can also be extended if it needs to be. Are there any questions? So at this point, we'll actually start awarding delegates. So like some of the other things, there's an example of the math on this in page 28. I forgot to mention that on the, if your precinct elects 2, this and that, on that mathematics worksheet, there's a viability, more or less, not calculator, but there's a viability explainer, as well as if you look right below that on awarding delegates, it lays it out here as well. And so I know when you look at it on a presentation, it can be a little daunting, but it lays it out in that caucus mathematics worksheet and reporting form as well. So everything I'll be talking about here, you can go back to that and see where it lays it all out. So the math for awarding delegates is you take the total number of members in a preference group, you multiply that times total number of delegates to be elected, and you divide that by total number of eligible caucus attendees, and that equals out to your delegates won. And this results will be rounded up at 0.5 and rounded down at less than 0.5. When you've done your calculation, total it up and compare that to the number of delegates assigned to your precinct, which kind of been passed around, as well as just a side note, those will be on the front of your caucus packet and on your reporting credentials, the number that your delegate elects. So they'll be in multiple different places. If this number adds up and is right, as I know it always does, you're good and you don't have to do anything else. I will actually work through a couple of problems, but the first one I'll work through one where it all adds up right and you're good and you can move forward. So we're going to take Carlton Precinct in Tama County. At this precinct there are 60 eligible caucus attendees, and this specific precinct elects 5 to the county convention. Since it is 4 or more, our viability threshold is at 15%. So to be viable, we take 60, multiply it times 0.15, which gives us 9. So to get a delegate to the county convention, you have to have 9 people. So we go through and we see that in this scenario, Paul came out pretty good on this precinct, and he got 22 members. George had a good showing and had 16 people. 12 were for John. And 10 were for Ringo. Tama County are not big Ringo people. So, sorry about that, Ringo. So, we're going to take Paul. Paul 1, we're going to go ahead and just use Paul as the example. So, Paul had 22 members that aligned with him for his preference group. We multiplied that times 5, which is the number of delegates to be elected to Carlton Precinct to the Tama County Convention. We divided that by 60, which is the total number of attendees at the caucus that day. And we got 1.833, meaning that with rounding, Paul McCartney will receive 2 delegates to the county convention. And I'll do the breakdown of how everybody else fared right here. So when we do the math, we see 1.833 there for Paul. Rounding up gets 2. George had 16 people, so we multiply that times the number of delegates elected to the precinct, or elected to the county convention, divided by 60, which is 1.333. That rounds down. John got exactly 12, and so that means he's allotted 1 delegate. And Ringo had 10 and got 0.833 of delegates, but that rounds up. So when we do the math and you add up 2 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is equal to 5. You have 5 delegates allotted. You get 5 delegates to the county convention. The math went fine. That's how it ended up working out. So here's an example, a bigger example of that caucus mathematics worksheet on page 28, just in case anybody wants to see it there. And it lays out exactly that. Now, I know that at every precinct elected here, things are going to go fine, it's going to go smooth, and it'll be perfect. But there are some examples of where, with rounding, you might get too many delegates or too few delegates. And so I'm going to go over examples. First off, I'm going to start with what if too few delegates? So what if the total number of delegates apportioned is actually less than the number that your precinct gets? With rounding and this and that, that's possible. And so the simple answer is an additional delegate will be awarded to the group with the highest decimal below 0.5, kind of meaning that the group that was closest to rounding up but did not will actually be apportioned an additional delegate. And I'll run through an example of what that looks like. Okay, so making the math easy, as I know it will be for all of y'all, there are 100 people at the Milton precinct, and that precinct elects 6 to the county convention. Meaning that since it's 4 or more, that viability threshold is 15 members to be viable. So we go through and we run down the results here. John actually had a Milton precinct here. Likes John. 38 people were big John fans, and so John did well there. Paul got 24, George got 22, and Ringo just isn't doing real well in Iowa. And so Ringo got 16. So when we run the math originally, it's 2.28, 1.44, 1.32, 0.96. When we run our first rounding, it comes out to 2, 1, 1, and 1. That only equals 5 though. Meaning that we have to look at the decimal levels and say who was closest to being 0.5 but was not 0.5. And whoever that is will receive an additional delegate. It's important to note here, the whole number, the thing before the decimal does not matter. It is only the fraction. So Paul had 1.44. That was closest to rounding up but didn't round up. And so therefore, Paul will get the additional delegate, meaning that the final breakdown is 2, 2, 1, 1. Is there any questions on that?
It's here where I think that the math is unfair. Because if you look at the number of people that were for John, it's 38. That's 14 more people than were for Paul. And you give that delegate then to Paul, when in actuality it should probably go to John. That's where I don't like the caucus math that's used in Iowa.
And I wish I had a more comprehensive reason to give you, other than it's always been done that way.
I know, but it's...
I wish I had something good to answer to you.
It's really not fair to the candidates for office that get more delegates at the caucuses when this part of the math comes into play. It costs them delegates every time.
You can look at it this way though. 38 is a lot less than half of 100. If you gave them a third, they got half out of the 6. They got 3 out of 6 for only having 38. 24 is a lot closer. It's one-fourth of the total. 2 is a lot closer to a fourth than 3 is. So if you look at it, what's really fair, it's more fair to give that second one to the largest partial delegation than it is to simply the largest delegation.
Thanks, Terry.
I would guess that statistically over the state of Iowa, this kind of thing kind of balances out.
Yep.
I mean, it might be your point, here up here, but some other place it's flip-flop.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, totally is.
Yeah. And
Can you just review, because I know that you said it always rounds up. If it's 1.1, it rounds up for viability, but for this part, you use traditional rounding.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm glad you made that point because I forgot on viability. There are two different things. Viability always rounds up. Here it is traditional math. It is what you're used to, 0.5, well, until you get into the too few and too many. But on the face of it, 0.5 rounds up, 0.4 rounds down. And so, but viability, it can be 0.01, and that still rounds up. Are there any other questions on this? Okay, so what if too few is fairly simple, pretty straightforward. Too many is more or less the same way, but there's a kind of a little caveat attached to it. So what if the total number of delegates is actually greater than the number to be elected at the precinct? The answer will be a delegate will actually be subtracted from the preference group with the lowest decimal above 0.5, so the one that rounded up but was closest to not rounding up. There is kind of a caveat in this, though, in that during this process, a group cannot lose its only delegate. So even if there's a preference group that has 0.51 and would traditionally, might round down, if that's their only one, they cannot lose that. I'm going to work through an example of where that kicks in. So once again, the math is easy. We're at 100, like I know for all of you it will be. So the Jackson precinct has 100 people that are attending at it, and they elect 4 delegates to the county convention. Viability is 15% here since it's 4 or more. And so when we run the math, John has 41 members, Paul's got 23, George has got 21, and Ringo is just not doing well and has 15. So our math after rounding goes to 2, 1, 1, and 1, but that's not how many delegates were allotted, and so someone's going to have to lose that. So here intuitively, you would probably just look at the decimals and say, okay, Ringo rounded up at 0.6, so Ringo would lose that delegate and we're fine. It's not that, because that is Ringo's only delegate. So then we have to go to the next one that rounded up, which is John here at 1.64. John will not gain that delegate, and the final numbers will be 1, 1, 1, and 1. Any questions on that? So, another what if that I know won't happen for anyone in this room, but if it does, we can just be prepared for it. What if 2 or more preference groups are actually tied for the gain or loss of a delegate? A game of chance is used. A coin toss is recommended for between 2 groups, while a drawing names out of a hat is recommended for 3 or more. So. Any questions? Okay, so now we're going to move forward to reporting results. Actually, on page 29, there's screenshots that are going to follow the first presentation. So just you can follow along with that. Before you do that, though, it's important to note on page 28 that before you even start reporting results, you have to get sign-off from each of the candidates' groups. This is more or less that each preference group had someone sign off and said, yes, the math was done correctly, this process was fair, I am certifying that these results are, what happened at the caucus, they can report. So that's just kind of an important thing to note. Get that sign off before you report results, and then you can start actually reporting. Actually, this year Microsoft has made an application for us to report results. So I'll walk through first that application of how to report. Whether you have a Windows phone, an Android phone, or an iPhone, or any of those tablets that accompany those different softwares, you can actually report results via that tablet or phone. You would search for it. I know at least in the Apple Store, I searched for Iowa Caucus. It was the second thing to show up. The Des Moines Register was the first. It's more or less the same. The most accurate search term you can use, though, is Iowa Democratic Caucuses 2016. That is on page 29 in case you want to download it at home. That's the easiest thing to search, and it will show up in your app store. So we're going to go through actually using the app. This is what the front page will look like. You'll see the IDP's caucus logo. If it is red and you see an elephant, you're not in the right spot. So you were in the wrong one there. But it'll have a note just saying, hey, connecting to wireless network or cellular data. There could be some just little differences in how it looks, like font and just kind of spacing, but it's the exact same app between two different devices. So the first thing you'll see on that is actually a welcome screen. What's really neat about this application is, although you have to be verified and you have to be authenticated to use it to report results, anyone can download it, and anyone can actually calculate viability with it. And I'll go through what that looks like here in a second. But this is kind of the welcome screen that you get. Make sure when you've opened this application and you're ready to report results, all of the results are ready and all you need to do is type in the numbers, because for security reasons it will only allow you after 15 minutes, if it's taken you more than 15 minutes to report results, it'll actually time out and you'll have to go back. That's a little daunting for people, I know, but when I've done this as a practice, I think the last time I had was 4 minutes and like 52 seconds was how long the whole process took me. And so only a third of the time of that 15 minutes. So we'll first start with the viability calculator. And this is something that I would tell your observers if they just want to follow along with the process. This is where they can actually just use that calculator and say, okay, this precinct elects 5 delegates. We have 125 people there. What is viability? This and that. Even you as a chair, if you just want to kind of run estimates of, okay, this is how many people showed up in 08. So if this number shows up, this is what our viability is going to be. If you just kind of want to play around with it, you don't have to log in to do that. Anybody can calculate viability with that. So let's say that you're ready to report, this and that. So it's important kind of to note here, if you do want to use the app, you need to get your cell phone number, your smartphone number, or whatever number can get a text message to Walt, so he can get it to me and I can get it to Microsoft. Because you will have to actually be authenticated to be able to use this app. We don't want anybody being able to report for precincts, and so there's a 4-step process so that we can authenticate, yes, the person here is authorized to report results, and this is the right thing. So let's say you've given your cell phone to Walt ahead of time, and we've gotten it to Microsoft. So you say, yes, I'm ready to report. Keep in mind you have 15 minutes to do that, so this is after everything is done. You have it all on paper. You just need to enter numbers. You'll go ahead and click yes at this point. And this is where the authorization kicks in. And so I'll go through every step, but this is just kind of so you can see the broad of why we do what we do here. The first step is entering your phone number that you've already previously had authorized. Then you will enter your precinct code. That code will be on your reporting credentials as well as on the front of your caucus packet. So that will be in 2 separate places where your precinct code is. Once you enter those things, you'll receive a text message with a PIN number, and then you will enter that PIN number. If all of those things match, you'll be authorized, you can go forward and report. So, the first thing is you will enter the phone number you've been giving, you've given the IDP for reporting purposes. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit more, but it is actually possible that you don't have a smartphone or you don't have a tablet, but you have someone else in your precinct that does, and they have downloaded the app. You give us your phone number, and the only reason we really need the phone number is so we can text you a PIN number. If you have an iPad and you have just a regular cell phone, we'll text you a PIN number and you can do this from your iPad. And so that's why the phone number is so important to doing that. After that, you're going to enter your precinct code. Like I said, it'll be found on your caucus packet as well as on the back of your reporting credentials that's in your caucus packet as well. After you enter that precinct code, click Authorize, and then you'll be receiving a PIN. The last time I did this, it was about a 34-second turnaround. They're pretty fast getting the PIN numbers out, and so at this point is when it expires in 15 minutes. Once you receive your PIN, it's a four-digit number. You'll enter that PIN. Kind of how I mentioned, if you're using this on someone else's phone, you'll still be able to report. You can report from any tablet or phone that has internet access, as long as you gave us a phone number that you can receive a text message from. So then you'll go ahead and enter that 4-digit PIN. Click Enter PIN. And then all things being okay, you'll move forward and you'll be authorized. You'll be seeing a message confirming that you're authorized. It'll have your county and your precinct. If this is wrong, we messed up, and so you'll have to call and report using the IDP toll-free reporting system. So if this is wrong, if it doesn't match up, if it's Adair County, and obviously no one here is from Adair County, something happened, and so you'll have to actually report via the phone. So now entering numbers. So at this point, it's pretty much going to reaffirm what you've already done. You're going to start this step by just entering the eligible attendees that you calculated at 7 p.m. You didn't recalculate it, that was the number at 7 p.m. You'll just go ahead and enter that number. And then you'll enter your preference group sizes. So this is not the number of delegates, this is the number of preference groups. And also, it's important to note here, this is at the end of the night. So you might have on this had, at the beginning of the night, there were 4 people that were there for tulips. But after all the realignment happened, obviously they're not a viable group in this precinct. And so they were absorbed into something else. And so remember, when reporting here, this is how it broke down at the end of the night. Also important that every section has to have, if no one did it, you have to manually enter 0. It doesn't default to 0, you have to type in 0. Once you've entered all your numbers and double checked it, go ahead and click calculate results. So here's an example of an error screen of, let's say you accidentally typed in something wrong, this or that. What this error screen is saying is that, wait, so you have a group here in uncommitted that had 10, but in this precinct, 10 is not viable. And so that shouldn't have happened. It's just saying that something's off with the numbers here. In your precinct, 10 is not viable, and so those should have already gone to somewhere else. You've already done the math at this point, so you shouldn't get error screens like this because you're done with the process. You're just entering results. But here's an example of an error screen. Also with game of chances, if when you throw in the math, you'd already done a game of chance, it's going to catch that. It's going to say, oh, you either did or need to do a game of chance. What was the result of that game of chance? And so in this case, the daisies won. So you click daisies, and then it's going to ask you to manually confirm, yes, daisies won. The reason being is when you have 2 choices, it's easy to accidentally press one that's off. This is a 2-step verification process to say, yes, I meant to click daisies, daisies won. At that point, it's going to go ahead and run your calculations for you. It's just going to have how it ended up breaking down and this and that. So just to kind of go back over to refresh people where we're at this point in the process, you have calculated up. You've calculated up everything using the application. It's going to run through and it's going to say this is what happened. This is how the breakdown went. There was a tiebreaker. This person won. This is just kind of a summary of what happened. And then you're going to start confirming. So after that, on the application, you're going to see a tally of the number of delegates that each candidate received. Go ahead and check those over and click Next. And then it's going to say Results Tallied, and it's going to go to Summary. You'll see a screen indicating the total number of delegates assigned to that precinct as soon as you go to your summary. So then it's going to go over all of them. It's going to say, this is how many we had, here are the zeros, this and that. It's going to ask you to go ahead and confirm once again, this is how the breakdown went, this is where things went. And then it's going to ask you to confirm again, where you say, you were about to confirm those results for this precinct, this county. Do you want to proceed? You're going to go ahead and click yes, and you're going to have a submission complete. An important thing to note, or a couple of things here, that is not the IDP helpline number that's down there. That's just a placeholder. That number will be on your caucus packet and on your reporting credentials. As well as if you look, and I'll go back, you see some back buttons there, like the no and back there, and there are back buttons right there. And you'll notice once you have submitted, you cannot go back. That is something, I guess, for y'all to know, so that the confirmation is the final say for everything, as well as something that I would tell the presidential preference groups, the preference group leaders. if they have any questions, and tell them I cannot resubmit results. Once I do results, they are final. In case anyone says, well, what's keeping you from going back when you get home and changing those results? You are actually blocked out at that point once you have submitted results. And so that's something to kind of let know to the preference group leaders when you're going to report, when you walk them through the process and say, I cannot recommit these results. And so once I do it, it's final. So after you have finally done it, you'll get a text message from the IDP saying, hey, thank you so much for reporting. As well as, if you want to check out results as a whole, go to our website, and it'll give our website right there. So a couple of notes, and this doesn't apply to anyone in this training, but I'll still just kind of let you know. In precinct selecting only one delegate, where no preference group's already formed, you should enter the total number of eligible attendees in the box next to the preference of that delegate, meaning that if your precinct elects one delegate, it was the feeling of the entire precinct that delegate won. So it on the application looks like all of them supported that preference. Like I said, there are no one delegate precincts in here, so it shouldn't matter to anybody in here. Once you submit results, once again, you cannot resubmit results, but if you did make a mistake, go ahead and call the IDP helpline. That will be on both the front of your caucus packet and it will be on your reporting credentials. And just let us know, say, hey, this is Walt in Precinct 1 for Dubuque County. I accidentally did this or that. We have some verification systems where we got to make sure, okay, yes, this actually is Walt. And that's why it's a good point to raise. Even if you're not using the smartphone reporting app, you need to make sure you get your county chair's your cell phone number so that we have someone to call in case anything looks weird. Question?
Yeah, if you're at step 11 and you submit it, and then all of a sudden somebody says, wait a minute, we screwed up. So if you haven't hit confirm submission yes, could you go back at that point and correct yourself?
Yes. Yep. At that point you can go back and correct yourself. But after you have confirmed submission, you cannot go back, but you can call the helpline, and we can, there is kind of a mechanism that we have in place for the whole state where if something comes back fishy or if we see a result that looks kind of off, like, all of the delegates went for one candidate here, and that's, that seems odd. We have some kind of red flag mechanisms, and so it could be that if it's a bad mistake, we've already caught it, and you're calling saying, yeah, we had a question about that. But go ahead and call the IDP helpline. One of us, me, or other volunteers will be working that night. And so we can fix it. If for any reason, is somebody a question? Okay. If for any reason you can't use the reporting app, you don't have a smartphone, you don't know anyone that does have a smartphone in your precinct, you can also use the old-fashioned, just toll-free reporting system. I'm about to walk through what that looks like in the next slide too. Just kind of a note, this is actually different than the helpline. The reporting system is toll-free and it's like an automatic kind of confirm results for this precinct, press 1. The helpline, you will get a human being. You'll get someone on that you can talk to. So this is what the IDP toll-free reporting system looks like. These are the steps. It's not 1-800 number, just so you know. That number has not come out yet, but it will be on your reporting credentials and on your caucus packet. It's very self-explanatory. The toll-free system, it kind of walks through exactly, hey, please enter your precinct number, followed by the pound key. Confirm this by pressing 1. And so it's pretty self-explanatory. It walks through the whole process with you. Kind of a note, this one asks for delegates, not number of people in preference group. It actually asks for delegates. So just remember that. When you're all finished there, you'll hear a confirmation message, and then you can hang up. So here's some what-if scenarios on either of the applications. So like a question might be, what if it takes me longer than 15 minutes and you get locked out of the app? The answer is just not a problem. You can just reauthorize your cell phone and just start back over. Like I said, this should not really happen because it's not, once you have all your results, it takes about 4 to 5 minutes to go ahead and just enter it all in and just click through. So this should not happen, but if it does, you can just reauthorize your phone and you'll get a new PIN. They'll send you that. What if you don't have a smartphone? You can download the app on someone else's phone. And as long as you have a cell phone number where you can receive text messages to, that other person can use that app, and you can report results with someone else's phone or tablet. Kind of an important thing to note is make sure that your current software is up to date. Something that George and I had run into is that he didn't have 8.4 on iPhone, and so you can't download it at that. So there are some operating system requirements, so just make sure your phone's up to date so you can download it. But yeah, kind of two more what if. What if your cell phone dies or has no service? You must still report results. Find somebody else's phone and call the toll-free system. The great thing about the toll-free system is it can work from any phone. With the caveat, the Tri-County Chair, Kurt, told me that it does not work on rotary phones. I don't know if that's true or why. You have a rotary phone? I don't know if that's true or why, but I will throw that out there. That he says it will not work on rotary phones. But other than that, any phone, whether it's someone else's cell phone or a landline, you can press 1, yes, I'm calling with this precinct, here's pound, this or that. So, what if you've submitted results and you realize you made a mistake? You can't resubmit results, but you need to call us immediately so that we can look at it and say, okay, so what's your precinct code? We're going to ask you for your reporting credentials so that we know it's not someone random just calling and asking, but we can get that mistake fixed. Are there any questions?
You said it took you 34 seconds to get the PIN?
To get the PIN.
Okay, when there's several thousand of us trying to call in and get a PIN and it took you 34 seconds, when the system isn't busy, are they going to expand the system for that night? Otherwise, I think it's going to be a long wait.
No, so, and Lucas, you've kind of been in the meetings with Microsoft a little bit on this.
Yeah, we did.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can answer that question. So we've been, Internology is the subsidiary of Microsoft that we've been working with when it comes to the system. They've assured us that they're going to have the bandwidth to have capacity for caucus night. Again, I want to reiterate, it's not just us who are reporting results into this particular system. It's the Republican Party of Iowa as well. We've both partnered with Microsoft and Internology with this, and the folks over there have assured us that they're going to have the bandwidth to carry capacity for caucus night. And this thing has been beta tested a number of different times as well. David's messed around with the system. We've had multiple people doing lots of beta testing with it. So yeah, we're excited to roll it out.
Can you call in earlier in the day?
Earlier in the day? No. Nope.
Not before when?
Anytime after 7. I mean, we can't start the breaking out of presidential preference until 7 o'clock, as was stated in here before. So anytime after 7.
Are there any more questions on that? Okay, good deal. We'll go ahead and move forward to electing delegates now. So while you're reporting, you can go ahead and start having the the preference groups go ahead and start their delegate selection process. Kind of a natural time frame for you to walk them through this process is when they come and sign off on the caucus math. You can go ahead and let them know, hey, go ahead and start doing your things for delegates, and go ahead and start kind of working with your delegates. This is how the process looks like that. So each preference group goes ahead and elects the number of delegates that they were chosen to elect. I walked through a couple of examples here. With if your preference group is only electing 1 delegate, it's just a simple majority, and written ballots can be used. If your preference group is electing 2 delegates, it's a simple majority on that one, and you can run people in rounds, as well as if there's 4 or 5 people that want to run. I'm going to go over and explain the process for 3 or more delegates. The by the book definition. I will say for people that this might be their first caucus to run. In principle, I guess in practice, it's not as formal as a process of this. It's kind of, does anyone want to be delegate? And I know in some of the rural precincts you have to kind of arm twist people to be delegates to the county convention. And so while this is how a competitive cycle would be run, I've had people that have kind of gotten worried and asked me after the training, that sounds like a lot. And I say, at your county, at your precinct caucus, I don't think it'll be as competitive, and it won't be this. But kind of the official way to do it is no more than half of the delegates plus one should be run the first round. You do it in rounds this way. Participants not elected in the first round can run in a second round. You kind of have a slate up there. And so you run 6 people up there, for instance, and you say, you get 4 votes amongst these 6 people. Cast your 4 people, get it. Anyone receiving over 50%, go ahead and they're good. Anyone under moves to the second round. If no one receives 50% on that, the lowest vote getter is dropped. So here's another what if. Doesn't apply to anyone in this room, but we'll still go through it. What if your precinct caucus only elects 1 delegate to the county convention, so no preference group form? That would mean that delegate is just elected by the caucus as a whole, by a simple majority. So kind of one of the things that it's actually in the IDP Constitution, and something we want to strive for is ensuring an equal number of representation between men and women. Care should also be taken to encourage diversity among the delegates. There's a statement that you'll read, and I'm not sure what page that's on in your guide here, but there's a statement that you'll read to the 14. Yeah, there's a statement that you'll read about electing delegates and trying to ensure diversity. If it is contested, people should be given 1 to 2 minutes to kind of speak to their preference group before voting. While the number is not limited, and you should among alternates, the rules are saying you should want to encourage diversity. While the number of alternates is not limited, a good rule of thumb is to elect just as many alternates as you have delegates, but just in practice, not more than 2. I know there are some precincts where you might say these 2 people are going to be delegates and the other 22 are just going to be alternates. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the problem is that you have to mail by law, you have to mail them the packets, and that's a lot of postage, and that starts costing a lot of money. And so just in practice, 2 to 1 ratio is generally pretty good. Anyone who is an alternate should be ready to step up if a delegate cannot show up. So it is possible to elect someone who's not present at the caucus. However, only those present may vote. So I'm going to kind of walk through that scenario of how you should do that and how it should not be done. What should not happen is to say, hey, you know what, we're all here. We still need a delegate. I see that Walt's not here, but he's a good Democrat. Let's just go ahead and elect Walt to do it. That's not a best practice because Walt didn't volunteer to do that, and you're just kind of declaring that. A good way that this could happen, and the way this does happen, is someone says, my son's getting married, and I can't be there on caucus night, and so I really like John Lennon. I followed John Lennon forever, and I want to represent John Lennon at my county convention. Can you guys, when you break off into preference groups and you start awarding delegates, would you mind electing me as a delegate? I'd like to do that. So that's how it would happen. Now, going back to page 27, this is kind of because I've had people ask me before, well, why is there an A for attendance? We assume if someone's signing in, they're all attending. This is the example of where someone might not be attending, but they're doing something for the county convention, and so you wouldn't sign for that person's name, but you would bubble in next to that person's name. Hey, although Walt is not here, Walt will be a delegate at the county convention, and so you'll bubble in the, the D or alternate, this or that. So now we're moving on to ratification of the slate. Ratification pretty much just means that it is the sense of the caucus that the rules were followed and everything was done fairly. To do this, the caucus comes back together and ratifies the slate as a whole. They must have a majority to vote. It's kind of important to do this because if you don't, it could actually be subject to a challenge at the county convention. So this is what that document looks like, and there's an example, page 40 something, I believe. Forty-two and 43. And this is also where you write down delegates' names, who the alternates are, this and that. That's what this form looks like. Are there any questions on that? Good deal. Okay, so now we're going to move on to electing county convention committee representatives. So while on here it says 2 per committee, different precincts in different counties do this a little differently. For instance, like an example is we have written on here 2 per committee, and that's kind of the average. But in Lynn County, you know, there are 82 precincts, meaning that their committee would have 160 people on it. And so obviously it's different county by county. But the two county convention committees that there are well, the platform committee that decides on the platform and which ones are going to be ratified, this and that, as well as the committee on committees that is then divided into rules, credentials, and arrangements, the people that help lock down the logistics of the county committee. You'll fill in there, if you see on that page 27, there's also bubbles for those 2 committees. If someone runs for that and is elected for that, you'll also fill in that bubble for them. Now for electing precinct committee people. This is another one that different counties have it different ways, but this is the first level of organization within the IDP. That they're elected by Democrats in their precinct to be on their central planning committee. So generally it's 2 unless otherwise noted, but different counties have different things. What is Jackson's, for instance? Is it 1 per? It's 2. Okay, and then in Dubuque? 12. Okay, so Delaware, what do y'all do? 1, 2? Okay. Right. So, yeah. So every county does it differently, and so just kind of follow up with your county chair on how many needs to be done there. There's also a corresponding bubble to fill in there if someone is elected for that position. Just let them know, make sure they know what the responsibilities are. That means coming to central planning committee meetings, working, get out the vote efforts, helping out with the county party. If this is a competitive election, they should be given a brief opportunity to speak and say why they want to run for this and what they want to do. And once that is decided, you'll also fill out the bubble there. Are there any questions on that?
What if nobody wants to do this? What if no one wants to,
It's time to put the screws to them. It's important.
Yeah, coercively suggest that happens.
I think you already addressed this, but I don't remember what you said for sure. You've got your list of everybody that attended and the results with the circles filled in, but you had somebody, Joe Blow couldn't make it, his son's getting married, he wants to be a delegate, so you're going to fill a box for him, but you don't have a line with a signature. You put him at the end. Where do you include?
You just bubble that. You don't sign for them. You will just bubble that.
You add their name at the bottom of the list and you fill the bubble.
It's already on the list.
Okay.
Right. Yep. And the reason that is because they couldn't do that unless they were already a Democrat in the precinct, because they can't re-register there because they're not there that day. And so their name will already be on the list for that. So then moving on to resolution discussion and adoption. As you know, resolutions are proposed by, could be anybody at the caucus. You can vote on them individually if you so choose. But what's more done in practice is just voting to move them all forward and letting that be decided by the platform committee at the county level. If you do decide to do it individually, there should be time to discuss them before every vote. But you can also limit discussion time. Resolution submission forms should be completed. And this will go in envelope B for the county chair. Kind of a thing to note, and there's actually an example of what a resolution form would look like on page 40 and 41. If you know somebody wants to submit a resolution, I would encourage them to go ahead and type that out before, and then just staple it to the resolution submission form. And so it's much easier as a secretary to retype, obviously, and so it makes it a whole lot easier on the county platform committee. So they can fill out, there's a spot down there where they can say what issue it is or proposed by and this and that. They'll still need to fill that out, proposed by, phone number, all that. But it's just easier for clerical purposes if they know they want to do that to go ahead and type it before. So that's what this looks like, and like I said, it's on page 41. And here's the back on the issues as well. Are there any questions on resolution discussion and adoption?
Will there be several of these in our packet?
Yes, there will be. Okay, so before adjournment, there's kind of a checklist of things you do. You'll just need to read over the checklist, and this is just a, was this done? Was that done? Did that get done? Did that get done? Just kind of a, before you finally let everybody out, make sure these things are done. Then you go to new business and adjournment. This is where you can ask, hey, we're about ready to adjourn. Does anyone have any new business that they want to come before the caucus? There might be a benefit supper going on, the next Thursday that people want to let everybody know about. There might be this or that. But if not, just let them know the county convention date, which is March 12th. The locations are to be decided depending on where your county is and where they've set up their location. Let them know when the next county central committee meeting is, and they're more than welcome to come. Let them know about any events that are happening, any fundraisers, any picnics, this or that. Hopefully not in February, but some people can be pretty rugged. Or any upcoming candidate events too. Assuming there's no other business, say hearing no further business, caucus is now adjourned. Thank you for coming. Are there any questions on new business? Yes?
Is there going to be that piece of paper where you just hang on the wall that it's in the packet when we get it? And that's what I always did. Just here's our schedule, just bang, bang, bang.
That's the agenda?
The agenda?
Yes, it'll a poster.
Poster.
Yeah, big poster. Yep.
In Dubuque, we always meet collectively after the caucuses and have a few barley tops and encourage people to bring their caucus packets to the county chair. And from there, we separate them the next day.
Yeah.
And send with our legislators down to Des Moines to IDP what is theirs and what we need. A couple of years we suffered the misfortune of having some ambitious people from Des Moines come up and take them that night. And we never got the resolutions or any of that stuff till after the county convention. So I would hope that when you print out those caucuses, find out and encourage to have people take them to their county chair before they pack them all up and mail them to Des Moines.
Yeah, and that's actually something that is going to come up in a couple of slides here. It's different per county, but some counties, for instance, on final caucus duties here, some counties, and I recommend it works out pretty well, have a central location that night where they ask, hey, we need everyone to bring your caucus materials to this location. For Blackhawk County, it's at their office downtown. I think Lynn County has something similar to that. And so any county chairs in the room, that can be a helpful idea if you can get everybody to bring it to you that night. But if you're having people mail them, here is kind of how that looks. These are, make sure that they include, your county and precinct, make sure everything is signed, make sure they're legible. But then if you are going to mail them and you don't have a county that takes them individually, mail them. So the white envelope A, and I know this is a little intimidating, but on the envelopes on the outside, it'll say what goes in where. So it'll have envelope A, this is what we need in here. Envelope B, this is what goes in here. Envelope C, this is what goes in here. So make sure that in envelope A, that the white copies of all the registration and the math worksheet is there. The surveys, the finance envelope, nomination papers for state legislature and above. Envelope B will have the yellow copies of the caucus registration and math worksheet, the youth caucus attendee form, and all the nomination papers from other below state legislature candidates. And then C will go to the county auditor with pink copies of caucus registration and math, as well as any voter registration forms or any vote by mail forms. If you are, if you're sending it to your county chair, Walt or Megan will take care of that. If you are mailing them yourself, it is very important that this is done timely, because for absentee ballot request forms, they have to be to the county auditor in 72 hours. So make sure that this is done. If you're not giving it to your county chair, make sure it is done timely. Any questions on that? Okay. Now we're going to do some scenarios that I know won't happen in any precincts in here, but have happened in the past in other places. So we'll walk through them. So let's say you arrive at your caucus site and your building is locked. Has anyone had this happen? That's good. What do you do?
Break in. Only.
So far we have break-in on the floor. I heard someone say get their number.
Pick the lock.
Pick the lock is on the floor. I'm not going to call for any seconds because I'm afraid this room might give them some seconds there. What was that?
Shouldn't you, if you're going to the site before the caucus, shouldn't you get a number of a maintenance person or
Yes.
a clerical person or somebody where you can say, if we have problems facility-wise that night, who do we call?
Exactly. Yes, 100%. That is the winner. Beforehand, when you were preparing for it, you got the number of a site manager, this or that. In your bigger counties, your chair has probably a list of those numbers, this or that, and so someone to call. An important thing to note here is that you keep everyone there. It's like, when we're trying to keep people in line on election day, the important thing is to keep everyone there, and so people aren't going away. Luckily, on an issue like this, the presidentials will probably be helpful in trying to keep their people there and keep calm with the situation. People that helped out in their caucus in 2008 might know something about this one. What if you run out of forms? Can't break in on this one. Boom. You brought with you extra paper. You will start writing by hand. Obviously on voter registration you can't do that, but for the other documents you'll have to write by hand. What happens, another fun 2008 scenario, what happens when you begin forming preference groups and you don't have enough space for your location?
Boys got outside.
It's pretty cold out there.
They'll go fast.
So go outside. I will broaden it with find more space. I know that some people at schools, for instance, went out in the hallway, found alternative locations, within the premises that worked. This and that, just make it work. What happens if you have bad cell phone service and you can't report results?
Send it in by regular mail.
Absolutely not on that one. The suggestion was send it in by mail.
Use a regular phone.
Use a regular phone, exactly. You can call that number from any phone out there. And so if someone has a cell phone that does have service, for instance, when I go north of Manchester, I don't get cell phone service. I have AT&T, but someone there has cell phone service, and you can call in from any number that has service. What happens if an observer is being disruptive?
Extricate them.
Kick them out? So, yes, while I encourage civility and giving them a warning first, you are the caucus chair, you rule your domain, you can ask them to leave.
What if they don't leave?
You can actually call the authorities.
Yep,
I mean, you can call me at the IDP helpline and I can talk to you about it if you want to. But you can call the authorities on that. What's so yes, on the floor also let them know where the Republican caucus is and let them act up there. Maybe throw in that they have free food. So. And for time purposes, we'll probably go ahead and just skip mock caucus today, but I will show you where our lucky locations we're going to be at. What we're caucusing for is favorite vacation destination. Dubuque is not one, sorry. So beach bum, hiking in the mountains, winter getaway, boating on the lake, and city life. So those were your potential ones. If there's nothing else, oh, got a question?
If we're electing these delegates, you talked about this round and electing half. Say everybody is there and we're all ladies and gentlemen about it and we agree who the delegates are and no one objects, can we just elect those 4 or 5 and be done with it?
Yes.
Or you're not going to get mad about it?
Nope.
But everyone has to agree.
I mean, there's a process, but I understand in practice more often than not, it's kind of a, hey, does anybody want to be a delegate? Yeah, sure, I'll be a delegate. Oh, I want to too. Never mind, I'll just be an alternate. I know, like, there are some precincts where it can be competitive, and there is a formal process, but...
That's what you have to do.
Yeah, that's what it's there for. But I understand, it more often than not, it turns out like that.
What happens after 7 o'clock when people are lined up out the door? Do you go to the last person in line and this is it? Good question.
Yes, and it's something that I probably should have touched on a little bit more. There in the back of your packet, there's a thing, and I don't know what page it is, but it's running, like, tips for running a caucus in a big precinct. What some people have told me who have run big precincts have at least mentioned to me is what I do is I send a volunteer out to the end of the line and I send them with a timer, and at 7 o'clock I have them step there, and so if anyone comes after 7, say, sorry, you know, this is the end of the line, these were people here at 7. Some people do that with tickets, where they'll give someone a ticket in line at 7, and at 7 o'clock they stop handing out tickets, and so if you come in to try to register and you don't have a ticket, you can't register. Everybody has every precinct does it differently, but after 7 o'clock, if you're not in line, you're out of luck. You could observe if you wanted to, yeah. Yep.
So I presume if some preference group isn't viable and gets pissed and leaves, they're not going to sign the form at the end agreeing to everything, and that's just understood because they're not there.
Yep, exactly. Is there anything else? Well, thank y'all very much. Lucas and I are going to stick around for a little bit after if you have any questions. This is my contact information. I'm not too far away, just live in Cedar Falls. So yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate your time and attention today.